Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current Podcast.
From an assassination attempt on a former president to an unprecedented withdrawal by a sitting president, there's certainly been no summer vacation from the U.S. presidential race. With both running mates now chosen, the candidate's character is becoming a focal point of the race. Fred Trump III has a unique insight on that, at least when it comes to his uncle. He is the son of Donald Trump's older brother. His new book is All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way. Fred Trump, good morning.
Good morning, Susan. Thanks for having me.
Why did you want to write this book?
I wrote this book to honor my father, Fred, who you mentioned, who is a very caring and charismatic guy, and my son, William, who is the most courageous and inspirational person I know who has complex disabilities. And it's he who opened the door for me to advocate on behalf of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
I want to talk a lot about William in the minutes ahead, but just tell us a little bit about your father.
He truly is one of the heroes of the book to me. Dad was a free spirit. Dad definitely went to the different drum. And he was great with me. He taught me how to fish. He got me into flying. And flying is really his passion. He wanted to become an airline pilot, and he did. And that was not acceptable to my grandfather, who was a very dominant guy in real estate and in the family. So my father, who followed his dream, was in the end crushed for it by my grandfather and Donald, who my dad, in essence, gave Donald the path to work with my grandfather and eventually take over the business. But Donald couldn't help himself and just piled on and helped take my father down.
Take him down how?
In spirit. There was no need for it. Dad wanted to do what Dad wanted to do. He achieved that. But again, he was constantly ridiculed for making the decision he did to become an airline pilot, to which Donald called him a glorified bus driver. I think that's pretty demeaning.
And now to William, you write, and you've told us that a big part of the reason for writing the book was to advocate for people with disabilities like William. Tell us about your son.
Well, thanks for asking. William right now is doing medically well. He was born, typically, we have two other kids, and it was almost like, okay, here's number 3, no big deal. A day after he was born, he started having hundreds of seizures each day. And he was in the neonatal intensive care unit at Mount Sinai Hospital in the city, which is where I was born, my sister was born, and my other 2 kids were born. And that led to 2 other hospitalizations for a total of 7 weeks. He has epilepsy, which he takes medication for every day. He's 25 years old now, an extremely wonderful young man. Everybody that he touches, they are the better for it. What this platform allows me is to speak out nationally, and other countries that are having similar issues with the healthcare system. We really need to fix various parts of it.
And I guess having an uncle who is the president of the United States would give you hope that you would have a platform to make some of these arguments. And yet there's a quote in the book when you are talking to your uncle about William, and you're talking to him about how you really need some Trump family money to continue to finance his care. And Donald Trump says to you, I don't know. He doesn't recognize you. Maybe you should just let him die and move down to Florida. How did that comment and that moment affect you?
Well, to this day, it's still hard to wrap my head around it. I don't know how one human being could say that about anybody else, least of all his grandnephew. My response was simply, Donald, he does recognize me. And to put it into context, Susan, if you don't mind, Donald had never met William. Donald had never asked to meet William. William was, like so many people in his life that he deems lesser than him, he doesn't want to know from it. Regarding the medical fund, that fund was only necessary to care for William for his therapeutic needs, because the healthcare system in this country is really off skew. But as you may know, and as I mentioned in the book, Donald and I were involved in a lawsuit when he hatched a scheme, this was in about 2000, to take my sister Mary and I out of my grandfather's will. The interesting part about that, and I hope your listeners will understand this, that Donald, after my father passed away, was named my trustee. He was my trustee, which meant he was supposed to protect me and my family. He did the exact opposite. He took advantage of my grandfather's dementia during that process. The memory of my dad was totally discarded. And during the most vulnerable times of my life and my wife Lisa's life, with William in hospital, we were hit with this. So when I would ask for money from the fund that had been set up by Donald and his siblings, I was literally asking for my own money. I always looked at it that way. I thought it was a shame that I had to be put in that position, especially to care for their grandnephew, but that's the way it was. And I just want to say that if you can't trust your own uncle to do the right thing, how can people of America trust him to take care of them if he's reelected president?
What I found so striking reading your book was how deep the struggle went for you regarding that trust. There were moments that you described where the two of you had a relationship. In fact, there were moments where you seemed close, and then something would happen. It just was repeated throughout the book. How do you process that? This has been a cathartic experience, believe me. We were close. Donald was the first person to put a golf club in my hand. Even when my father was alive, he would take me places and we would do things, maybe to a lesser extent than his younger brother, my Uncle Robert, who was really terrific with me. But yeah, there were instances where he did just horrible things to me. Grand scale, like the lawsuit, or even when he was running for president, he asked me if I would be interviewed for a New York Times article. And I was really hesitating to do it, but he called me twice and said, come on, please do it. And within that article, he said some disparaging things about my father, which, okay, my mistake, but he does those things. And just to get back to what he had said to me about William a few years earlier than that, and Lisa and I did, we used Donald's position as president to the advantage of trying to help the disabled community. My cousin Ivanka was very gracious in setting up a meeting with the cabinet secretary literally 3 months after Donald was inaugurated. And we have been involved with a wonderful group of very smart advocates. And it culminated in a meeting in the White House Oval Office. And Donald was there, and Donald was being Donald, but he seemed interested in it. And after 45 minutes, which was much more time than I thought we would be spending in there, the meeting dispersed. And I was called back in, and he greeted me with the very familiar, "Hey, pal, how's it going?" And we sat down, and he just looked at me and said, "Those people, the costs, why don't they just die?" So that was the precursor to, on a more global scale, to then what he said to me about his grandnephew 3 years later. The title of your book references All in the Family. You focus a lot on Donald Trump for obvious reasons, but your aunts and uncles also supported his efforts, certainly to limit how much money you and your sister inherited from your grandfather. And then they supported the decision to remove you from the Trump healthcare plan. Right. Where do these family traits, as you see them, come from?
I have to link it back to my grandfather. A very unemotional man, The word love was not thrown around very much, if at all. It was a very transactional. You hear that word being used about Donald. And, it started early on. There's an episode where I was with Donald and Robert, and I was probably 7 years old or so. And Donald just said, "Hey, pal, hit Robert." And, stupidly I did. And Robert just hauled off and smacked me on the face, which kind of stunned me and really did not make my mother very happy, who was there. So little incidents like that lead up to his personality traits.
I guess all families have little incidents that shape certainly the children that grow up and influence how they're seen. But in your case, it's a different story because your uncle went on to become the president of the United States, the leader of the free world.
Right. Yeah.
You say early in the book that you're a different kind of Trump. What does that mean?
Well, I certainly have my flaws. There's no doubt about that. But I think because of my mom and my father, I have a more caring attitude towards life. Like Dad, I root for the underdog. I want to help whenever I possibly can. If William's condition is what drove me forward to doing this on a larger scale, that's great. I've got all the energy in the world to do this, and I intend to. And I don't know if you were going to get to this later, but if you don't mind, I am going to be voting for, endorsing, and campaigning for Kamala Harris because I believe, first of all, she is the defense for our democracy to continue. Beyond that, and more personally, her administration will advocate on behalf of people with disabilities. And it's a large group, and it's a group that is mostly voiceless, and we need to give rise to them.
I do want to talk about that a little bit later, but I just want to explore a little bit more the whole idea of the push and pull that you experienced with your uncle, maybe as a way to understand the influence that he has over so many Americans. Your sister, Mary Trump, wrote her own tell-all during your uncle's term in office. What were your thoughts at the time about that? How did you feel about her book? And it didn't document as much of a push and pull as yours did.
I didn't read Mary's book. I knew it was going to be coming out, although it was a surprise to me. The difference between Mary's book and mine and any book that has ever been written about Donald, it's never been written by anyone who was as close to him during his formative years, during his business years, during his political years. No one had the access who has written a book. Yeah, sure, a journalist can come and say, I spent 2 hours with him. Well, I spent personal time with him in family settings, one-on-one, in the Oval Office together. So I know Donald better than anyone who has written a book about him.
You recently called him atomic crazy. What does that mean?
It just means that he's taken what he uses as a weapon to charge up his crowd. It's now to a much more ferocious way about him. So atomic crazy just came off the top of my head. But it's his rhetoric and his actions and the actions of his base have been amped up over the years. And I'm sorry to say you ain't seen the last of that.
How do you account for his appeal? As you say, you think you've seen him up close and you've seen him evolve over decades. How do you account for the fact that so many Americans like him, whether he is, to use your words, atomic crazy or not?
I will just for a second be an armchair psychologist. I read once that people like to be lied to. And I think people like to be lied to feel good about themselves. And Donald has that great ability to make it seem that he's rooting for them, that he's on their side. And I don't think anything can be further from the truth. He will use people that have become fans of his, and once he gets what he wants, he'll cast them aside. They're props to him.
What did you mean when you say we ain't seen nothing yet?
I just think, especially having a black woman running for president, that's going to bring out some very vile attitudes in people, perhaps led by Donald and his band of advisors.
You didn't vote for Donald Trump when he first ran. Did he know that?
He didn't ask, and I didn't tell him. And the reason I didn't vote for him is I believe in policy over politics, and none of Donald's policies are what I believe in. Kamala Harris believes in rights for the environment, more thoughtful gun control, women's reproductive rights. Those are things that I absolutely believe are essential for this country to move forward. And he didn't. And that's exactly why I voted for Hillary Clinton and for Joe Biden. And again, I will be voting and campaigning for Kamala Harris.
What do you think drives your uncle, Donald Trump, to in this race for president? What's motivating him?
One thing that Donald and I share is being relentless. You can call it, it's in our genes or whatever, but whatever we want to try to attain, we're relentless in doing it. I chose to do it in a little nicer way, if you will. Donald will do whatever it takes to get what he wants.
Have you heard from your family since the book came out?
They've sent a couple of notes, if you will, that I've heard it all before.
There will be people who think that you are doing this to enact some sort of revenge for what the family has done to you and your sister regarding your grandfather's will and the decision to cut you out of the family health care plan. What do you say to that?
I had every opportunity to do that in the past. I'm sort of known as the quiet Trump. I was in the rough and tumble real estate business for 35 years, but I never spoke out about the family. And I wanted to keep it that way. It was more concentrated on my family and my career. So when William was born and Lisa and I wanted to wait till he was settled in a group home environment, which he has been for the past couple of years, we figured, okay, now's the time to speak out on behalf of the disabled community. And with that and pairing it with my dad, really the only way I could was to tell the story of my family. That's a very complex story, a sometimes cruel story. And yes, without telling that story couldn't be told without telling about Donald, who is the dominant Trump in the family.
What does the name Trump mean to the next generation, do you think?
I'm saddened by the fact, and I know it really started with my father's alcoholism, that Mary and I were deemed, if you will, second-class citizens. So I'm focusing on my three children, Andrea, Christopher, and William. They, to me, are the future of the Trump family. Donald's side has their agenda, and my cousins have their kids, and I hope they love them as much as they possibly can.
Fred Trump, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate it.
Fred Trump III is Donald Trump's nephew. His new book is All in the Family, The Trumps, and How We Got This Way.